EastEnders Grant Mitchell, Ross Kemp, may be estranged from his son Mark Fowler Jr. Stephen Aaron Sipple, but he steps up to protect him from violent gangsters next week. An oblivious Grant has no idea just how deep Mark has fallen in with the criminal underworld, and as Mark's deadline to repay his debts to his associates approaches, Grant ends up making things even worse for his long-lost child in forthcoming scenes. Fans will remember that Mark landed in serious hot water with the gang he'd been working for when he failed to hand over someone who had been ratting them out to the police. That someone just happened to be Ravi Gulati, Aaron Thiara. But after learning of the informant's true identity, Mark spared Ravi from retaliation from the gang and was slapped with a death threat. Next week, Mark frets about how he is going to repay the £100,000 as his Aunt Sam Mitchell, Kim Metcalf, tries to convince him to speak to Grant for help. While he's initially resistant to ask anything of his dad, Lauren Branning, Jacqueline Jassa, is on hand to offer some words of wisdom that make him reconsider. However, he then changes his mind after a run-in with Grant at the cafe involving Linda Carter, Kelly Bright. As Mark tries to come up with other ways to raise the funds, but a potential lead through his dodgy dealings with Lauren comes to nothing, and he eventually confides in his sister Vicky Fowler, Alice Haig, about his debts, albeit missing out some crucial details. She encourages him to speak to his uncle Phil Mitchell, Steve McFadden, who agrees to give him £30,000 to buy some time with the gang. But when Grant then learns about what's been going on from Sam, he is determined to help. Knowing the complicated relationship between Mark and Grant, Phil tries to dissuade his brother from getting involved, but he fails to listen and wades in by arranging a meeting with Mark's boss Russell, who he is familiar with. However, things soon go from bad to worse when their past differences resurface. Angered by Grant poking around in his business, Russell breaks into number 43 and tells Vicky the truth about Mark's dealings, leaving her stunned. When she confronts her brother, Mark is more furious to learn of Grant's meddling and orders his father out of his life for good. But with Grant determined to build bridges with his son, will his attempts at reconciliation actually place Mark in even more deadly danger? The night had that heavy electric stillness that EastEnders fans would recognize, the kind where trouble doesn't just arrive, it brews. Walford Square sat under flickering streetlights, every shadow stretching longer than it should, as if the darkness itself was waiting for something to snap. And then like a storm breaking he returned. Grant Mitchell didn't make quiet entrances. He never had. The slam of a car door echoed across the square, sharp enough to make a couple outside the Queen Vic glance over their shoulders. Years might have passed, lines might have deepened on his face, but Grant carried the same raw energy, controlled chaos wrapped in a leather jacket. But this wasn't a homecoming. Not really. He wasn't here for nostalgia. He was here because Walford had a new problem, one that even the locals were too scared to talk about. A name whispered in corners. A man no one dared cross. Ricky Vane. He wasn't from Walford, but he'd made himself at home fast, too fast. Protection rackets. Backroom deals. Violence that felt unpredictable, almost casual. The kind of man who smiled while breaking bones. And worst of all, he'd set his sights on the Mitchells. Grant didn't need the full story. He read it in the tension hanging in the air, in the way people avoided eye contact, in the quiet fear etched into familiar faces. Walford wasn't just under pressure, it was suffocating. And Grant Mitchell had never been the type to stand by. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. Inside a dimly lit warehouse on the edge of the square, Grant found him. Ricky Vane leaned casually against a crate, like he owned the place. Like he owned everything. Two of his men flanked him, but they weren't the threat. Ricky was. "You must be Grant," Ricky said, his voice calm, almost amused. "Heard a lot about you." Grant didn't reply right away. He just stared, sizing him up, weighing the kind of man he was dealing with. "Funny," Grant finally muttered, stepping closer. "I ain't heard nothing worth listening to." A smirk curled on Ricky's lips. Then without warning, everything exploded. The first punch came from Grant, fast and brutal. It landed clean, snapping Ricky's head sideways. For a second it looked like the legend might still be unstoppable. But Ricky didn't fall. He laughed. And that was when Grant knew, this wasn't going to be a simple fight. The warehouse turned into chaos. Fists, crates crashing, glass shattering somewhere in the dark. Grant took down one of Ricky's men, then the other. But Ricky stayed standing, relentless, almost enjoying it. "You don't get it, do you?" Ricky said, wiping blood from his lip. "This isn't your square anymore." Grant swung again, but this time Ricky dodged. The counterattack was swift, vicious. A punch to the ribs. Another to the jaw. Grant staggered back, caught off guard by the sheer force. For the first time in a long time, Grant Mitchell was on the back foot. News of the fight spread fast. By morning, Walford was buzzing. Some said Grant had won. Others said he barely made it out. But one thing was certain: Ricky Vane wasn't going anywhere. And now it was personal. Grant sat alone in the dark corner of the Queen Vic, nursing a drink he hadn't touched. Bruises were already forming, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, running through every second of that fight, every mistake. He'd underestimated Ricky. And in Walford, that kind of mistake didn't just cost pride. Cost everything. The next move came from Ricky. Late that evening, a car pulled up outside the Mitchell house. No noise. No warning. Just a message, delivered in the most brutal way possible. A brick through the window. Wrapped around it a note. "Leave. Or next time it won't be glass." Grant didn't need to read it twice. His jaw tightened, fists clenching at his sides. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a challenge. And Grant Mitchell never walked away from a challenge. The final confrontation came under the same flickering streetlights where it had all begun. But this time it wasn't just about two men. It was about control. About fear. About who really owned Walford. Grant stepped into the open, his presence cutting through the night like a blade. Ricky was already there, waiting, as if he'd known this moment was coming all along. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Ricky said. Grant cracked his knuckles, eyes locked on his opponent. "No," he said simply. "I don't." What followed wasn't just a fight, it was a war. Raw. Messy. No rules, no hesitation. Every punch carried weight, history, pride. Grant fought like a man protecting something bigger than himself. But Ricky fought like a man with nothing to lose. And that made him dangerous. Too dangerous. The final blow came suddenly. A hidden knife flashing under the streetlight. A sharp intake of breath. Blood. Grant staggered. For a split second, the world seemed to stop. Ricky stepped back, breathing hard, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "Told you," he said quietly. "This isn't your world anymore." Grant dropped to one knee, the pain hitting him all at once. Around them, doors cracked open, faces peering out, but no one dared step in. Because this wasn't just a fight. This was a takeover. As sirens wailed in the distance, Ricky disappeared into the shadows, leaving chaos behind him. And Grant? He didn't stay down. Even as the blood seeped through his fingers, even as the pain threatened to drag him under, he forced himself back to his feet. Because if there was one thing Walford knew about Grant Mitchell, it was that he never stayed beaten. And this was far from over. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to EastEnders Spoilers Official.